The morning sky was the color of old bone, dull, lifeless, waiting. Dust rolled over the dry street of Calico Ridge, caught in the cold wind that scraped down from the hills. A crooked wooden gallows stood in the middle of the square, already stained with past justice, or what passed for it in these parts. Miriam Sloane stood beneath the noose. Her dress was torn, dirt-caked and stiff with old blood. Her hands were bound tight in front of her, rope biting into cracked wrists. Her long dark hair hung damp with sweat, sticking to her temples, and her belly, swollen, heavy, trembling beneath the worn cloth. 8 months, maybe more. The child inside her kicked once, a reminder. She didn't flinch. A small crowd had gathered, wrapped in coats and silence. No one spoke. No one cheered. Most didn't even look. They'd seen enough death to know when not to ask questions. On the porch of the sheriff's office stood Marshal Eaton, wide-brimmed hat shadowing his face, thick arms crossed over his chest. He spat into the dust and nodded once. "Hanging goes forward," he said flatly. "Judge signed off at dusk yesterday." A deputy stepped forward, nervous. "But sir, she's with child. There's law." Eaton's stare stopped him cold. "Ain't no room in law for sympathy when the husband was a traitor. He stole from the army, rode with bushwhackers. She helped him hide. Justice don't pause for contractions." Miriam lifted her chin. Her face was bruised, her lips split, but her eyes, gray as thunder, held defiance. "My husband stole nothing," she said, voice hoarse but firm. "He fed starving people. Took what the union left to rot in the depot and gave it to widows and children. You call that treason because you never went hungry." The marshal sneered. "He hanged for his crimes, and now so will you." He nodded to the hangman. The rope was lowered. The barrel beneath her feet scraped as it was dragged into place. Miriam's heart didn't pound. She had made peace with death days ago. What she couldn't make peace with was leaving her child to be born in the dirt, without her arms, without a name. The hangman stepped up, placing the rope around her neck. Wind stirred again, sharper now. It whipped through the square, lifting dust into the air like a warning. The hangman hesitated. Then, a sound. High, thin, sharp, an arrow. It struck the gallows post just above his head with a solid thunk, the shaft quivering. Gasps erupted. Another arrow followed, this one hitting the rifle out of the deputy's hands. It exploded into splinters. "Ambush!" someone shouted. Chaos, screaming. Men scrambling for cover. Miriam barely registered the commotion when a shadow moved at the edge of the square. Fast, low, like wind slipping between reeds. A figure leapt from a nearby rooftop. He hit the ground rolling and came up with a tomahawk in one hand, a bow in the other. Tall, lean, covered in dust and war paint. Long black hair tied behind his shoulders, face marked with lines of ash and blood. His chest rose, slow and steady, like nothing around him mattered. "Comanche." The crowd scattered. Marshal Eaton shouted something. Too late. The warrior lunged forward, leapt onto the gallows, and in 2 swift motions. 1, he cut the rope around Miriam's wrists. 2, he slashed the noose free from her throat. Her knees buckled. He caught her before she could fall, arm firm around her back. The other hand never left the tomahawk. "Can you walk?" he asked, voice low, rough like wind through canyon stone. Miriam blinked. "What? Who?" Another bullet rang out. The warrior moved fast, shielding her with his body as he dove from the platform. They rolled, dust and grit flying. His horse was waiting, a black gelding, breath steaming in the morning chill. He lifted her as if she weighed nothing, setting her across the saddle, one arm cradling her belly. She cried out. "Easy," he growled, mounting behind her. "Hold on." Then they were gone. Bullets cracked behind them. Shouts echoed through the hills. But the horse was faster. The warrior didn't look back. Miriam tried to breathe, every jolt agony in her ribs, her spine, her womb. The wind clawed at her face. Blood from a reopened wound trickled into her eye. She turned her head slightly, trying to see the man behind her. "Why?" she gasped. He didn't answer, just rode. They reached the hills by midday. Scrub brush turned to rocky incline. The trail twisted through narrow gullies and past dry creek beds until at last the warrior slowed. A cluster of boulders formed a natural hollow, hidden from sight, shaded from the sun. He dismounted and pulled her down with care, cradling her until her feet touched ground. She staggered. He caught her again. Miriam leaned against the stone, panting, her stomach cramped. "Not yet. Please, not yet." The warrior retrieved a water skin and handed it to her. She drank. It wasn't until her breath slowed that she looked at him clearly. He knelt by the fire pit, striking flint into dry moss, moving with practiced stillness. He hadn't removed his weapons. His eyes scanned the ridgeline constantly, as if the earth might rise against them. She whispered, "My name is Miriam." Nothing. Then after a pause, "Elias." She frowned. "Is that your name?" He nodded once. She wanted to ask more. Why he had come. Why he had saved her. Why now? But the words tangled behind her teeth. He stirred the fire to life. The heat warmed her bruised skin, but it didn't touch the ache beneath. She stared at the flame. The wind whistled faintly over stone. Finally she whispered, "I didn't want to die, but I don't know how to live anymore." Elias didn't answer, but he placed a blanket across her shoulders. And for the first time in weeks, Miriam Sloan closed her eyes, knowing she wouldn't wake up in a noose. The fire crackled softly in the windless hollow. Miriam sat wrapped in a warm blanket, knees drawn up to her chest, one hand resting on the rise of her belly. Her eyes were half-lidded but awake. Sleep teased her, but her mind wouldn't settle. Pain still echoed through her ribs. Her throat burned from the rope. Her wrists were raw where the bindings had rubbed her skin open. And through it all, the baby moved, alive, defiant. She glanced at Elias. The Comanche warrior hadn't moved in hours. He sat cross-legged beside the dying fire, shoulders squared, bow across his lap, tomahawk laid near his foot. His eyes didn't close. They flicked constantly between shadows and distant ridgelines. He was like something carved from the stone around them. "Do you ever sleep?" she whispered. He didn't answer. Miriam hugged the blanket tighter. "You're not going to kill me, are you?" That made him turn. His face was hard to read. Not cruel, not gentle, just quiet, still. "I don't kill women," he said flatly. She blinked. "That's a low bar." Elias looked back to the darkness. She sighed. "I'm sorry, that wasn't fair." Silence. She picked at the corner of the blanket. "You saved me. I don't even know why. You could have ridden past. Let them do what they came to do." A long pause. "I was in town," he said. "Trading. I saw the gallows. And I've seen one too many." That was all he offered. She let it sit. Morning came slow and gray. The fire had turned to ash, but the coals still pulsed faint red. Elias stood first. He stretched silently, then began to pack their small camp with swift, efficient movements. Miriam groaned as she sat up, one hand pressed against her lower back. He looked over. "Can you walk?" "Not fast." He nodded. "We won't." She wanted to ask, "Where are we going?" But she didn't. Part of her was too tired. Another part already knew the answer. Wherever death couldn't find them for another night. They walked slowly through the morning light. Elias led the way, guiding her along narrow trails that weaved through sagebrush and broken stone. He walked with the kind of grace that spoke of generations born on this land. Feet silent, eyes always scanning, never wasting a step. Miriam stumbled. He turned back, offering an arm. She refused the first time. The second time, she took it. They stopped midday near a small creek. Elias knelt and cupped water into his hands, offering it to her first, then filled his own flask. Miriam sat on a flat rock, cradling her belly. The child kicked. She winced. Elias noticed. "How far along?" She exhaled. 8 months, maybe more." "Soon." "I know." He tore a strip of jerky and handed her half. She chewed slowly, swallowed hard. "They hanged him in front of me," she said suddenly. Elias looked up. "My husband. They said he was stealing from the Union. But we weren't rebels. He took crates from abandoned trains. Flour, coffee, dried meat. Gave it to starving families. Former slaves, widows." She didn't cry. Her voice was flat. "They called it treason. He died gasping. I thought they'd let me live, that they'd let me have this baby. She shook her head. I was stupid. Elias didn't speak, but he sat with her longer than he needed to, until her breathing slowed again. That night they camped beneath a rock overhang. The wind howled past the stone like an old ghost, but Elias built the fire tight and low, wrapped them in buffalo hide, and kept watch. Miriam lay curled, her hand on her stomach, watching him from across the flames. You lost someone too, didn't you? He didn't look up. You look like a man with no one left to wait for. A long silence, then low. A wife and a son. She felt something cave inward in her chest. What happened? Soldiers came. His voice was calm, deadpan. Burned the winter camp. Shot first. Didn't ask names. Her throat closed. I'm sorry, she said. He only nodded. Was your boy, how old? 5. His eyes didn't blink. He thought he could fly. I told him he could. He ran off a log, flapped his arms, fell into snow, laughed for an hour. Miriam smiled, tears stinging her eyes. She didn't speak again that night, and neither did he. The third day was harder. Her body ached deeper. Her ankles swelled. The pressure in her lower back wouldn't fade, and the baby had shifted lower. Every step felt like a question she couldn't answer. They reached a grove where Elias set up another small fire. Miriam sat against a tree trunk, gasping. Elias crouched beside her, his brow furrowed. It's coming, she said. He nodded. I'll make shelter. He moved fast, cutting down branches, clearing brush, laying pelts in the dirt beside the fire. Then he brought water, herbs, cloth. Miriam shivered. Have you done this before? He met her gaze. Once. She didn't ask who. She knew. By nightfall, she lay curled, sweat-drenched, eyes wide with pain. Elias knelt beside her, boiling water, grinding bark, placing cool cloths on her forehead. Her voice cracked. If I die, don't let them bury me like a thief. You won't die. You don't know that. I've watched death long enough to know when it waits. It's not here tonight. She let that settle. A contraction hit. She screamed into her arm. Elias didn't flinch. He didn't speak. He stayed. The fire snapped low and slow, casting shadows on the walls of the hollow like ghosts stretching toward the sky. Miriam screamed into the buffalo pelt. Her body arched, muscles clenched, a deep primal pain rolling through her in waves. Her hands grasped at the earth, nails clawing at damp soil, legs trembling beneath the weight of everything trying to tear through her from the inside out. And Elias was there. He knelt by her side, one hand steadying her shoulder, the other wringing claws through water and herbal tinctures he had brewed without a word. He moved with calm precision, never rushed, never shaken, even as Miriam cried, begged, bled. You have to breathe, he told her quietly. I can't, she sobbed. You can. Another contraction hit. Her scream echoed through the trees. Elias dipped a cloth into the cooling pot, pressed it against her forehead. You're not dying, he said, voice low and final. This pain has a purpose. Let it come. Tears streaked her cheeks. It's too much. You're still here. She turned her face away, panting, moaning. Lightning flickered far off beyond the hills. Thunder rumbled like ancient drums. The wind tugged at the trees. Elias stood for a moment, pulling a heated knife from the fire, then knelt again. Push, he said. She shook her head. Push, and she did. The child came just before dawn. A girl, tiny, slippery, angry at the world already. Her first cry broke the silence like a blade through still water. Miriam wept the moment she heard it. Deep, guttural sobs she couldn't hold back. She reached for the child with shaking hands, the blanket soaked with sweat still clinging to her shoulders. Elias cut the cord with his knife, wiped the child down, wrapped her in softened hide, and placed her in Miriam's arms. The baby whimpered once, then latched onto her mother's warmth and fell silent. Miriam stared down at her daughter, breath caught in her chest, arms trembling. You're here, she whispered. You're real. Elias didn't speak. He crouched nearby, wiping the blood from his hands with a cloth, then tossed it into the fire without ceremony. He watched them, not with emotion, not with fear, just silence, like something ancient inside him had paused. Later, the wind shifted. The night eased into gray morning. Elias moved like a shadow again, collecting wood, grinding herbs, drying cloths. He said nothing, but Miriam could feel him there, like a stone wall behind her back. Not always warm, but always there. The baby slept against her chest, pink-cheeked and perfect. Miriam turned toward him as he sat by the fire, repairing a strap on his quiver. "She doesn't have a name." Elias didn't look up. "That's for you to give. I don't know what fits." "Then wait." A pause. "You'll know when it's time." She studied him. "You talk more when I'm screaming." He looked up, slow. "You listen better when you're screaming." Miriam smiled, tired and raw. "That sounds about right." They sat in quiet a while, letting the fire speak for them. Then her voice softened. "You said you've done this before." He nodded once. "My wife," he said. "Her second birth, a boy. She bled too much." Miriam's heart dropped. "She died?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. His eyes had already said it. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He returned to stitching the leather. "She died in winter. Deep snow. I carried her down the mountain with the boy wrapped in furs. He lived 3 days." Miriam closed her eyes, one hand pressed gently to her baby's back. "What was his name?" she asked. Elias stopped. Then, "Ashani." Her breath caught. "That's beautiful." He nodded but said nothing more. The rest of the day passed in slow silence. Miriam nursed the baby, drank willow bark tea, and dozed in intervals. Her body was broken, but not dead. Her soul felt raw, scraped, but something inside her, something fragile, had survived. Elias stayed close. He didn't hover, but she could feel him nearby. That evening, he returned from a short hunt with a rabbit, which he cleaned and cooked without comment. He placed a carved bowl of stew beside her and waited until she had eaten half before eating himself. She broke the silence. "You saved me. You saved her." He said nothing. "You didn't have to." Still silence. She looked up from her bowl. "You could have kept walking, watched the gallows from the shadows and turned away. But you didn't." He stirred his stew. "You think that's mercy?" She blinked. "Isn't it?" Elias shook his head. "It's not mercy to stop a rope. It's mercy to teach someone how to live after." She stared at him, and he looked back. "You want her to survive, then survive first," he said. "Not just breath and food, but choice, dignity, fire." Miriam felt something crack in her chest. Not pain, not even grief. Something like hope. "I don't want to just keep her alive," she whispered. "I want to raise her in a world that won't try to kill her for where she was born." Elias nodded once. "Then we walk, when you're strong enough, and we find land where no one knows your name." "Is that possible?" "No," he said, "but we try anyway." That night, as the stars bled into the sky and wind curled around the fire like a lullaby, Miriam spoke softly to her daughter. She still hadn't named her, but the word forming in her mind tasted like warmth, like wildflowers, like breath. When she turned to look at Elias, she found him where he always was, in the dark, watching the trees, listening to the earth as if it whispered only to him. And for the first time, she felt no fear in the silence, because he was there, because they had lived, and tomorrow they would begin again. The baby slept against Miriam's chest, swaddled in buffalo hide, her tiny breath warming the space between them. The world had shifted, not dramatically, not like a storm or a scream, but like a quiet turning of the earth beneath their feet. Pain had been survived. A child had been born. The fire of death had passed, and now only embers remained. It was time to move. Elias saddled the horse without a word, checking straps, scanning the ridgeline. He moved like a man with a blade in his shadow, every step purposeful. He didn't ask Miriam if she was ready. She stood without being told. Her legs trembled. Her muscles screamed. But she climbed onto the horse with her baby in her arms and said nothing. They rode east, away from the hanging tree, away from the fire hollow, into open country where the sky bled blue into gray, and the wind carried no names. Hours passed in silence. Miriam stared at the horizon, eyes half-lidded. Every hoofbeat rocked through her bones. Her daughter squirmed once, then settled again. She whispered against the baby's forehead, "You don't know what you've already lived through." Elias didn't speak, but she could feel his gaze flick to her, then away. They passed dry creek beds, bones of old cattle sun-bleached in the grass, fence posts rotted and broken. No homes, no signs of life, just dust and wind and memory. At midday, they stopped beneath a weathered bluff. Elias helped her down. She sat with her back to the stone, nursing her child while Elias lit a small fire and boiled wild onions and jerky into a rough stew. As she ate, she asked, "Is this how you lived before?" Elias shrugged. Before what? Before the war. Before the camps burned. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "No. Back then I had a home, a wife who sang, a son who ran too far, a dog that never listened." She smiled faintly. "And now? Now I move. I keep breathing." Miriam looked at her baby, then back at him. "Breathing isn't enough. Not for me." Elias nodded slowly. "Then you're already stronger than most." They slept beneath the bluff that night. No fire. Too risky. Elias pressed his palm to the earth, eyes scanning the stars, his breath slow and deep like a man listening to voices buried in the stone. Miriam lay beside the baby, unable to sleep. Finally she whispered, "There's something following us." Elias didn't move. "Yes." She sat up. "How many?" "3, maybe 4. They don't ride fast." Her heart clenched. "The marshal?" "Could be. Or men who want the bounty on your name." She closed her eyes. "I don't want to run forever," she said. Elias finally looked at her. "Then we don't." "What do you mean?" "We don't run. Not forever. We ride until there's no place left to chase. Then we stand." Miriam's voice trembled. "And fight?" "If we must." She looked down at her daughter. "What if that gets her killed?" His eyes didn't blink. "What if hiding does?" The question struck deeper than any answer could reach. She looked out into the darkness and didn't reply. The next morning they found the river. Wide, brown, slow-moving. Elias rowed upstream until they found an abandoned ferry house. Its roof half collapsed, a rusted stove inside, and a bed frame with only one leg. But it had walls. Miriam sat on the floor, leaning back against the beam as the baby fed. Elias checked every corner, every shadow, and set traps near the tree line. That night they lit no fire. Elias kept watch from the roof. Miriam whispered lullabies she barely remembered. The baby slept in her arms, and something inside her, that wild panic, that constant grief, settled just slightly. She woke in the middle of the night to the sound of movement. Not Elias, not animal. A twig snapped, then another. She sat up slowly, heart racing. From above, Elias's voice cut through the dark like a knife. "Get inside." She didn't hesitate. She crawled across the room, pulled the baby into her arms, and ducked behind the overturned stove. Outside, boots hit dirt. Voices. "You sure they came this way?" "She's bleeding. Fresh birth. Ain't hard to follow." Gunmetal clicked. Elias didn't speak. Then came a voice she recognized. The deputy, the young one. The one who flinched during the hanging. "She's wanted by the marshal. Said there's a $50 bounty, dead or alive." Another voice laughed. "Dead's easier." Inside, Miriam felt the baby stir. She pressed her lips to the girl's forehead, whispering nothing, just breath. Then the first shot rang out. A rifle crack. A man screamed. Then silence. She clutched her child tighter. Outside, footsteps raced. Another shot, shouting. A third shot, closer now. Then, an arrow thudded into wood. Someone screamed again. Then nothing. Minutes passed. Then a shadow appeared in the doorway. Elias. His hands were bloodied, his shirt torn, his breath short, but he nodded. "It's done." She collapsed into him, tears falling hot against his chest. He didn't flinch. He held them both. The morning after the ambush, the world held still. A fog had rolled in from the river, thick and silver, wrapping the old ferry house in silence. The baby, still unnamed, slept with her cheek against Miriam's chest. The child's small breaths were steady, software. the only sound besides the birds outside daring to sing. Elias had returned before dawn, arms streaked with blood, not his. He had buried the bodies beneath the cedar trees without a word. Now he sat near the broken window, sharpening his blade with slow, steady strokes. Miriam watched him as she rocked her daughter. The last few days clung to her skin like dust. Birth, blood, escape, terror, and still somehow she was here, alive. "Thank you," she said. Elias didn't look up. "You already said that." "I'm saying it again." He nodded once. "I should have died on that gallows," she whispered, "or bled out giving birth, or caught a bullet from one of those bastards." He didn't answer. "But I didn't. You pulled me out of the fire, Elias. You gave her a life, and me, a reason." His eyes met hers, not cold, not soft, just real. "I didn't do it for thanks." "I know," she said. "That's why it mattered." By noon the fog had burned off. Miriam insisted on standing. Her legs ached. Her arms were weak, but she would not sit idle. She boiled water in the rusted stove, tore linen strips from her dress to clean her wounds, and folded her few belongings into a single bundle. When Elias returned from checking traps, he found her outside, sun on her face, humming softly as the baby lay in a basket of bundled pelts. "You shouldn't be up," he said. "I shouldn't be alive either." He said nothing more. Instead, he crouched beside the baby and held out a small carved figure, a fox smoothed from riverwood. "For her," he said. Miriam blinked. "You made this?" He nodded. "She'll need a name to go with it then," she said, smiling down at the child. Elias waited. Miriam whispered, "Ashani." He looked up sharply. "She should carry something good," she explained. "Something from someone who mattered." He didn't speak, but his breath caught for just a second. Miriam didn't press. Some griefs were honored by silence. They stayed by the river for 3 more days. For the first time, Miriam felt something she hadn't tasted in months. Peace. Ashani gurgled, eyes bright. Elias brought fresh fish from the shallows, taught Miriam how to lay snare lines in the underbrush. At night, they sat by the fire, sharing quiet stories like stones passed hand to hand. He told her how to read the wind. She told him about the garden she once had in Virginia, how she grew lavender even when the ground cracked from drought. He said she talked too much. She said he didn't talk enough, and they both smiled. But peace never lasts. On the 4th morning, Elias returned from patrol with his jaw tight. "They're coming." Miriam was packing before he finished the sentence. "How many?" "2 riders. No uniforms. Could be scouts." "Bounty hunters?" "Maybe." Ashani stirred. Miriam scooped her up, heart pounding. Elias slung his bow across his back. "We ride now. There's a canyon 5 miles east. If we reach it before nightfall, we lose them." They rode fast. Miriam didn't ask questions. She had learned by now that Elias wouldn't speak unless it mattered. And when it mattered, she listened. By dusk, the canyon swallowed them whole. The walls rose red and jagged on both sides, winding like a snake's back. Wind howled through the narrow pass. They stopped beneath a stone outcrop as the sky turned gold. Elias built a fire. Miriam fed Ashani, then wrapped her tightly in a woven shawl. She held her close as she sat beside him. "Are you tired of saving me yet?" she asked. He stirred the fire. "Not yet." She looked at him, eyes soft. "Then don't stop." He met her gaze. Something passed between them. Heavy, unspoken, real. "I can't offer you a home," he said quietly. "I'm not asking for a house," she replied. "I'm asking if you'll keep walking beside me." He didn't answer, but he didn't look away, and sometimes that was enough. That night, as Ashani slept in the crook of her mother's arm and the fire burned low, Miriam whispered into the stillness, "I'm not surviving anymore, Elias. I'm living." And from the other side of the flames, his voice came low and sure. "So am I." They found the valley at first light. It opened like a secret, lush, green, tucked between canyon walls scarred by time. A thin stream split through the grass, sparkling with morning frost. Tall cottonwoods lined the banks, their branches reaching like arms long denied rest. Elias reined in the horse and looked down into the bowl of land. Miriam sat behind him, Ashani nestled against her chest. The baby stirred, then settled again, as if sensing the peace below. "This it?" she asked softly. Elias didn't answer immediately. He scanned the ridgeline, the rocks, the tree line, then finally nodded once. "It could be." They dismounted slowly. Miriam winced as her feet hit the ground, legs stiff from hours of riding. But when she looked out across the grass, she felt something stir deep inside, something warm, almost forgotten. Hope. She turned to Elias. "Is it safe?" He shrugged. "Nothing is. But it's far." He nodded. "And quiet." He nodded again. She smiled. "Then it's enough." They built slowly. At first, just a fire pit, then a lean-to of branches and hides. Elias hunted deer. Miriam gathered berries. Ashani grew stronger with each sunrise, her cries louder, her eyes brighter. Elias carved a cradle from juniper. Miriam lined it with wildflowers. They planted roots, silent ones, buried deep. At night they sat by the fire, Miriam humming soft lullabies, Elias sharpening arrowheads or whittling small animals from scrap wood. She caught him smiling once. He didn't deny it. One morning Miriam found a flat patch of land near the stream and cleared it with a shovel Elias had repaired. She turned the earth, rocks digging into her palms. Elias watched from a distance, arms crossed. "You don't have to do that yet," he said. "I want to." He stepped closer. "Why?" She looked up, hair clinging to her brow, dirt on her cheeks. "Because I'm not waiting to be chased anymore. I want to grow something that doesn't run." He stared at her a moment, then crouched beside her. Together they cleared the soil, seed by seed. Weeks passed. The trees turned gold. Ashani learned to grip fingers, to laugh, to cry at the sound of thunder. One night a storm rolled in, deep and growling. Rain pounded the earth. Miriam wrapped Ashani close and stood near the fire, watching the cave mouth. She couldn't stop shaking. Elias stood beside her, silent. She whispered, "This is when it usually happens." "What?" "The fear, the running, the dying." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. He took her hand. She let him. Winter crept in without warning. They dug deeper into the hill, reinforcing their shelter with stone and timber. Elias taught Miriam how to stretch hides. She taught him how to bake flatbread over hot coals. They didn't talk about what they were building. They just did it. One night, as snow fell outside and the fire glowed soft and steady, Miriam sat with Ashani, asleep across her lap. Elias sat near the door, knife in hand, carving something new. Miriam watched him. "You still carry it, don't you?" He looked up. "Carry what?" "The weight, the loss." He was quiet. Then, "Yes." She nodded. "Me too." He placed the carving in her palm. A mother, a child, two figures carved into one piece of wood, bound together by grain and shape. She stared at it, throat tight. "She'll never remember what we ran from," she said. "She'll remember what you built." Miriam looked at him. "What we built." This time he didn't correct her. Spring came. The river ran faster. Their crops pushed through the soil. Ashani learned to stand, to wobble, to fall and try again. Each step she took was a kind of defiance, a kind of prayer. Miriam stood by the stream, sleeves rolled up, her daughter crawling in the grass beside her. Elias approached from the trees carrying a bow and a rabbit slung over his shoulder. "We're almost out of salt," he said. Miriam smiled. "Guess we'll have to trade. There's a settlement 2 days east, right?" He nodded. "Small, quiet, no lawmen." She hesitated. "Do we tell them our names?" Elias considered it. Then, "No." "Then who am I?" He looked down at the child playing in the grass, then back at Miriam. "You're her mother." She smiled, eyes glassy. "And you?" He paused. "I'm the one who stayed." That night they buried the last of the old things, a torn shawl, a broken noose. Miriam knelt at the edge of the cottonwood grove and whispered the names of the dead. Her husband, his son, their ghosts folded into the earth. When she stood, Elias was there. He offered his hand. She took it, and they walked home. Two people with no past left to run from. Just a place they had chosen, and a child who would never know the weight of a rope or the sound of a gunshot. only the scent of wildflowers, the warmth of a fire, and the love that had bloomed, through ash, through blood, through silence. And so, across these unforgiving lands, another tale drifts away with the wind. If this quiet courage, this stubborn heart touched you in any way, leave a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and pass this story on to someone who needs it. Don't forget to subscribe, because out here there are still so many truths left to tell, each one carved from pain, hope, and dust. This is Wild West Stories. Thank you for watching.